so that we are going to record this presentation for those who couldn't be with us. I'm Jennifer Rubin. I am president of LWV ODC, the League of Women Voters of Orange, Durham, and Chatham County, and we are very pleased that you are with us this evening for another of our State of Our Democracy series programs. We began these a couple years ago, and they have been incredibly popular ways to discuss issues that are of importance to our democracy and the underpinnings of our democracy. So we are thrilled that you are joining us this evening. We'll just remind you, just as a courtesy to our speaker, if you would all put yourselves on mute, we'll have an opportunity to unmute potentially for discussion at the end.
I think we're muted.
But with that, I will turn it over to Ann Triolzi, who is
over to the far
on our board of directors, who is our organizer of the Democracy Series. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ann.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. We're glad you're able to join us tonight. I did also want to add to what Jennifer's already said and just mention that we will be taking questions at the end of the session. So if you have questions that come up for you during the presentation, put them in the chat. And Sally Stubbs, who is also a member of the ODC board, will be the moderator and go through those questions at the end of the session. So we're looking at the Capitol building. Yeah, go ahead to the next slide. As we consider events that led up to the act of rebellion on January 6th, 2 years ago, I want to take a moment to reflect on how those events caused a change for many of us. A change from taking our democracy for granted to understanding that democracy needs to be nurtured and is something continually to aspire to. Next slide. So with that in mind, the ODC, as we reflected on the events that were happening, decided that it was important to educate ourselves and the community about what it means to live in a democracy and to understand the many layers of institutions, policies, philosophies, and competing politics that are juggling for power and control. To that end, we initiated the educational series on the state of our democracy. Since the spring of 2021, we have invited scholars and experts across the fields of law, public policy, political science, history, to present on the 7 topics listed here. Just as a note, if you are interested in viewing any of these sessions, you can do so on our website, lwvodc.org, and click on the Learning Center in the menu on the homepage. Next slide. So that brings us to tonight. Suzanne Fisher will speak about the Electoral College and your vote. Suzanne is currently the president of the Asheville-Buncombe County League. She has spent considerable time researching the Electoral College and popular vote and is leading the League's National Popular Vote Action Team. We are pleased Suzanne has agreed to share her expertise in this area, and it is with great pleasure that I welcome her.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. I'm glad to be here. As you can see, my background is not in history or political science or anything like that. So this will be, but this is my effort on this. So I'm trying to share screen. Okay, here we go. And let me just get this to slide view, slideshow. Okay, is this good for everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm just going to minimize your faces. So I'm going to talk about mainly the election of the president, though you did send me some questions on election of other federal officials, and I'll be talking about that. I think I'll just jump right in. I'll try to not to go too fast. If I go too fast, holler at me and let me know to slow down. So we have somewhere over 500,000 elected offices in our country at all levels of government. And in all of these but one, the candidate with the most votes is a winner. They're direct elections. Ironically, for our one national office, the election is indirect. So how did this happen? Well, we have to go way back to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. And there was, in fact, a proposal made for direct election of the president by James Wilson, who was a delegate from Pennsylvania, but it was never voted on. James Madison stated he felt popular vote was the fittest way to go forward, but that isn't what happened. And in fact, they put election of the president into the Committee on Unresolved Issues, which wasn't too promising. I think I've heard or read different things that some people thought, well, everybody knew it was going to be George Washington, so it wasn't a big deal, or they were embarrassed to discuss it in front of him. At any point, they took 30 votes over 22 days towards the end of that long, hot summer in Philadelphia. And they went through they discussed 5 different methods: a popular vote, to have state governors vote, state legislatures, Congress, and electors. And as I'm sure everybody in this audience is aware, they ended up leaving it to the states to decide via electors. And this is Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. Each state shall appoint, in such a manner as the legislature may direct, a number of electors. It's important to realize that this is a state-by-state decision. It's an exclusive and plenary power of the states. And so, though most people probably don't realize it, when we go to cast our ballot, and I will say president now, I know it's president and vice president, but I'll just say president, we're not really voting for the person's name who's listed as running for president. We're voting for a slate that has been pledged to that candidate. But if you're going to have electors, then you have to decide how you will allocate electors to each state. So they decided that each state would get 2 electors, 1 per senator, and then 1 elector for each congressional district. Well, then you have to divide up the states into congressional districts. And those are allocated based on the population of the state at the most recent census. The first one was done in 1790, the most recent in 2020. And then the critical part, and the part that we have to live with, is that there was then the question, well, in the South, there were many people who were chattel slaves. How do we count them? They are part of the population. Of course, they can't vote. And what they decided is that each one of those would be counted as 3/5 of a person to determine the population, and therefore your congressional districts, and therefore your total number of electors, even though they couldn't vote. So what were the reasons for doing this? Well, the one thing is that our founding fathers really were not all that democratic with a small d. They did not necessarily have confidence in decisions made by people who are not like them, which was male, wealthy, white, and almost always Protestant. They had a legitimate concern about dissemination of information about candidates in the late 1700s. You know, they didn't have a postal system quite by then. So they were worried that people in the hinterlands, and as this map shows it was in effect in 1787, most states, including our own, claimed all the territory out to the Mississippi, even though there were very few people there. There was a concern about balancing the influence of large and small states, which is why we have a Senate and a House of Representatives as well. But the main reason was so that the chattel slave states would ratify the Constitution. It was to keep the southern states into what was the United States. That is the overwhelming reason. This differs by how it was set up in the Constitution for representatives. Representatives have always been chosen by popular vote, and this is just the actual wording in there. The 14th Amendment just got rid of the 3/5 counting for enslaved people and just said they would be the whole number of persons, but still excluding Indians. Again, not a bright light in our history. Now, election of senators was very different from the very beginning. The Senate were going to be chosen by the state legislature, the actual people who were in the legislature, not electors, but legislators that had been elected there. This led to some problems. When legislators were deadlocked, a state could go without federal senators for months or even years, which was not good for them. And over time, something developed, and it was first in the state of Oregon, called the Oregon system. And it was a little complicated. They had a primary for popular vote of the federal senators, and then all state legislature candidates had to agree that they would honor that popular vote. And over time, this got to be adopted by over half the states in the early 1900s. It is a good example, and this will come up again, is how the states are sometimes the laboratories or proving grounds for changes in aspects of our elections. And then in 1913, in the 17th Amendment, they said that the Senate should be elected by popular vote. And this comes as a surprise to a lot of people. It did to me. I don't remember this part of history, and I was a pretty good student of American history. But not until 1913, until just before World War I, were senators elected by popular vote. Now, what happened post-convention? Well, we have to get Alexander Hamilton in here somehow. So the Federalist paper, actually number 68, addressed the Electoral College, and it was all in. He felt that a small number of persons selected by their fellow citizens would be smart enough to elect the president. Actually, after the convention, Thomas Jefferson proposed a number of amendments to the Constitution, and which seemed to be going more for, well, exactly general suffrage or an executive chosen by the people. But none of those amendments went anywhere. Now, I've read different things that say that there are up to 800 efforts to change the Electoral College, but there's only one that was ever successful. And that was the 12th Amendment in 1804. And this was proposed following two problematic elections. One was the 1796 election, which resulted in John Adams being president and Thomas Jefferson being his vice president and being of different parties. That didn't go so well. And it's surprising that they really didn't address different parties in the Constitution. If you thought that was bad, in the 1800 election, Jefferson and Burr both had the exact same number of Electoral College votes. So that was a problem. Originally, prior to the 12th Amendment, every elector cast 2 votes, and the candidate with the most votes was president and the second vice president. The 12th Amendment had electors cast separate votes for president and vice president, and that ensured that they would be of the same party. And that was also about when parties started running slates of candidates. And it also established some very complex rules about handling ties that I'm not going to go into. So what about recent proposals to the constitutional amendment to, in this case, abolish the Electoral College? Well, there was a pretty strong effort in the 1970s led by Birch Bayh of Indiana. And the impetus was the 1968 three-way election. And you can see Nixon got 301 votes, but 43.5% of the popular vote. Humphrey got far less, but hardly a little bit less in the popular vote. And Wallace, who was running as a third party, got some number of Electoral College votes and 13.5% of the popular. And there was concern about the discrepancy of the Electoral College and the popular vote difference. It's kind of surprising now that that would be a concern. So what the proposal was that a slate would win if it had at least 40%. If no slate got to 40%, there would be a runoff. This is similar to the French presidential system. It passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, but was blocked on the full Senate through a number of Southern senators, including Sam Ervin of North Carolina. There were a couple more tries that also failed, and then the whole issue sort of went dormant. Now, you asked me to talk about the Electoral Count Act, and so I learned more about it. The Electoral Count Act of 1887, again, the impetus was an unusual election in which Hayes got 165 votes, Tilden 184, and a 500,000 popular vote advantage, but you needed 185 to win. It was further complicated by the 4 states that submitted 2 slates each, one for each candidate. And after much wrangling, there was finally an electoral commission and awarded all 20 votes to Hayes, who won. There were a number of the major provisions, and this is a pretty complicated act. It minimizes congressional involvement in election disputes, again, putting the primary responsibility to the states. It does set procedures and deadlines for the states. It provides the ascertainment process for the states to submit their information, and it was until recently codified as Title III, Chapter 1 of the US Code. Now, right now, we have the Electoral Count Reform Act of 2022, which is a bipartisan effort to update the Act of 1887. And the impetus was what we saw at the beginning, everything that happened on January 6, 2022, the misinformation and the insurgents at the Capitol. This requires states to appoint electors on election day. It eliminates the concept of failed elections. It does allow for a delay if there's a hurricane or some major disaster. It clarifies the process by which states ascertain and send the results to Congress. It provides a clear role for courts, for federal courts. It makes it very clear that the role of vice president for the congressional aspect is ceremonial. It raises the bar to make objections to state election results, and it calculates how a majority of appointed electors will be calculated. If Congress somehow rejects any electors, then the denominator will be reduced. This is a pretty quick summary. I've got a link here, which is an excellent article I found that goes into this a lot more in detail. And pretty much as breaking news, the Senate passed this as part of the omnibus bill on December 22 of 2022. The House passed it the day later, and the president signed it on December 29th. So it is now the law of the land. So that's the past and some of the present. Well, what's our present situation? Well, in my opinion, it's a bit of a mess. We have gerrymandering in many states. We have second place presidents, battleground state campaigning, lower voter turnout in spectator states, and most importantly, not all votes are equal. So this is the current electoral map after the 2020 census, with each state getting their 2 automatic and 1 for each representative. And so North Carolina has now 14 congressional districts and 2 senators. And of course, 270 is the number to win. The total of 538 has been set since 1964, which is just after the residents of the District of Columbia got to vote for president. And it's a zero-sum game. So if one state gets more, it means a state got less. So in the last round, I believe California and New York, and I forget all the states, some lost and other states got one. But unless there's some congressional action, we won't have more than 538 electors. It's kind of interesting to think about how these electors, what number of people are per elector is going on. So I took the smallest state and the biggest state. Wyoming has a little over 500,000 people. They only have 1 representative. They have 3 electors. So they have that total number per representative. They have 288,000 per senator and 190, just under 200,000 per electoral college vote. Now, California is our biggest state. It has a lot more electoral college votes, though the number per representative is much higher than our smallest state. The number per senator is, of course, half of their total. It's huge. It's 19 million. And the population per electoral college vote is much higher. So not all electoral college votes are equal, just like not all numbers of citizens are represented equally by their senators. If you're curious, North Carolina is a little closer to California in some ways than one of the smaller states, for being sort of a medium-sized state in that. Now, we've had 5 second-place presidents in the history of our country, and 2, I assume, in the lifetime, or probably even the voting lifetime of everybody on this call. That's where the president, got the person who got the Electoral College votes most was not the popular vote winner. How does this happen? Well, the main reason is when the winner-take-all assignment of Electoral College votes, which currently 48 states use, and the district. And that means when whichever presidential slate wins in the state, whether they win by 100 votes, 1,000,000 votes, whatever number, they get all the Electoral College votes. This means effectively that the votes who voted for one of the other slates, their votes don't count. And this has been a major factor in leading to second-place presidents. Winner take all is not mentioned in the Constitution. It's not discussed in the Federalist Papers. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were very much opposed to it. 3 states used it in the first election and promptly repealed it. But over time, ultimately in 1888, all states use winner take all, though relatively recently, 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, have changed to proportional voting by congressional district. The other contributing factor to second-place presidents is the battleground state or swing state campaigning, whatever you want to call it. The numbers vary, but generally there are about 20 states that are reliably red and 20 states that are reliably blue, which leads to, I said 10 to 12, again, it varies from election to election, 10 to 12 battleground states in each presidential election. These are the key to winning the Electoral College. And they kind of divide into some of them being the more important swing states than the others. This did start early. The election of 1880 was the first that involved a deliberate focus on winning certain states. And it has been a factor in many elections and seems to be increasingly important in the past several. So what are the outcomes of battleground state campaigning? Well, the people who run for president and the people who manage their campaigns are smart people. They realize they only have to focus on these, we'll just say 10 states in any given election. So all of their major campaign events post-convention, the events, the polling, the media buys, are all in those few states. And they may even just target certain critical congressional districts in those states. The national party support on the ground, whatever they have, is concentrated there. Well, the media is going to follow the candidate. So that means that we get almost all the media coverage we see is just in those 10 battleground states. And if you live in one of those, you get really tired of the ads. The issues they discuss. In recent elections, we haven't heard a lot about wildfires. Well, those affect mainly states in the West. They're either solidly red or solidly blue, and they're not so critical. But we sure do hear a lot about fracking, which is involved in Pennsylvania and Ohio. I've expressed this as depressed voter turnout. What we see is a up to 10% or more increased voter turnout in battleground states than in the spectator states. And this is, this has down ballot implications, because if you're in a state that is going to go one way or the other and you decide not to go for president, well, you're not voting for governor if it's up that year, whatever Senate and your federal representative, your state house, your county, your city, your whatever, your dog catcher. It's not good for people voting at all the levels that are important. And we have a disproportionate influence of battleground states. Not all votes are equal, and sometimes second place presidents. This extends into the presidency. There are documented 4 visits by the president, vice president, and cabinet to what are considered to be swing states in the next one. There are more FEMA disaster declarations. The policies continue to be important. There's higher discretionary spending. I think one of the real problems is that a second place president, there's always this cloud or whatever. They know they don't have the mandate. They don't reflect the will of the people, but they still have to somehow try to govern. And this is just a quick reminder, and the cute cartoons come from the National Popular Vote Office of Bush Gore. It was a 500,000 discrepancy, but it all came down to 537 votes in the one county in Florida. More recently, it was a huge 2.8 million discrepancy and only a 78,000 vote swing to give it to Trump. This is a slide again from the National Popular Vote Office. It's a little hard to see, but you can see that there's in it, which is a swing state, varies a little bit over time, but you can see the huge numbers of campaign visits to a certain number of states and a very few to others. I'll just say that there are a lot of onesies and twosies here and more here. Some candidates are more inclined to have rallies here, there, and everywhere than others, and I'll leave it at that. Oops. So in our last several elections, we've had 2 second place winners. We've had 2 near misses, and it really makes you wonder what's next for our wheel of fortune for presidential campaigns. So just to remind people, a near miss and the last election is really a really good example. And we heard for a long time about how just under 22,000 votes spread out among 3 states could have flipped the Electoral College. But there have been others, and these are just a couple examples I picked out. About 60,000 could have put Kerry over Bush, and less than 10,000 could have put Ford over Carter in 1976. So we've had 59 elections in our history. 16 have been near misses, 5 are second place finishes. That's not a very good track record, in my opinion, as you say. So what can we do? Well, we could try to change the Constitution. But as I said, at least statistically, 1 success in 800-ish attempts, not good odds. Or since how states vote in the Electoral College is state law, those laws can be changed or repealed exactly as they were enacted by passing a new state law. This is a state issue. It can be fixed without an amendment to the Constitution. There have been a number of alternative proposals as to how to use the Electoral College, work with it to try and get a national winner. And these are just a couple that I picked out. Award 2 Electoral College votes to the national winner and the rest to the winner in the congressional district. Award 2 to the winner in the state and statewide winner, and then the rest to the congressional districts. This is how Maine and Nebraska do it. The thing is that if you have gerrymandered districts, those will come into play and are not unlikely to make it go to truly have a popular vote winner. Another is to the states automatically award 2 Electoral College votes to the national winner and the rest to the winner in the state. This gives the national winner a head start, if you will, of 102 Electoral College votes, but none of these guarantees that the popular vote winner will be by the president. But there is a way, and some of you were probably wondering when I was going to get here, but here we are. It's the National Popular Vote Bill. This is an agreement among the states that guarantees the U.S. presidency to the candidate that gets the most popular votes in the 50 states and D.C. For this, the states replace their winner-take-all laws with new laws that state that this is what they're going to do. And it goes into effect when states with 270 electoral votes, the ones you need, the minimum number to win the presidency, have been committed to the compact. Just to sort of explain it in slightly different terms, it's constitutionally conservative, state-based, nonpartisan. It was begun in 2006, so it's not in response to very recent elections. It retains the Electoral College and the power of the states. States that sign on to this, are doing it on a contingent basis. They don't change what they're doing till you hit the 270 votes. And when this goes into effect, every person's vote will be equal for every state, and every state will be politically relevant in every presidential election. I think this really embodies one of our mantras in the league of your vote is your voice. What are some of the expected outcomes? Well, candidates will need to campaign in all states and all areas, urban, rural, suburban. It will be more like the governor campaigns in the primary in a given state. They can't give up any part of the state. Candidates will need to address issues important to all states. Based on the differences we see now between battleground and spectator states, we think voter turnout will be increased. And again, every vote in every state will be relevant. Everyone will be in play. So it's a good idea. Maybe I've convinced you. Where are we? Well, we are pretty far along. So far, 15 states and the district have signed on to the national, it's really called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, for a total of 195 electoral votes. And this is adjusted for the most recent census. And I've listed the states. The states that have signed on are green. Orange means one legislative chamber has passed it. Yellow is both. There's just one state that Nevada passed it by both and the governor vetoed it. Blue is one hearing, and gray is even less activity. So you can see North Carolina is orange, which means it was passed by one legislative chamber. I'll just talk about this also in the way of this is looking promising. A Pew poll that came out just at the end of last year shows that the percentage of people who think that we should change the current system so that the candidate with most votes wins is increasing, and the number who think we should keep the Electoral College is decreasing. So it certainly seems to be popular in the general population. Just to go to the North Carolina situation, yes, it was passed, but it was way back in 2007, 1 year after the National Popular Vote effort was started. Since then, nothing happened for 10 years. In 2017 and 2019, it was introduced, but really didn't go anywhere. 2021 was obviously a very unusual long session during the pandemic. 2023, we don't know, but certainly a number of us are going to be working very hard to at least get bills introduced, to try and get a hearing, to try and get us going in the conversation. To expect it to be passed this time in North Carolina is probably a little overly optimistic, but we really want to get it into the popular discussion. Just talk a little bit about interstate compacts. It's just like I said, it's an agreement between two or more states in which they agree to do something or adopt a set of standards or somehow cooperate. Congress doesn't really place many restrictions on this, except it must be on something that the powers of the state have to exercise, and that's where Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution comes in. There are a lot of these. Lots of times boundaries between states are rivers or lakes or something, so it may include water access, or if they have agreements about flood control. The Powerball lottery is a good example of an interstate compact where states pool their lottery funds when bridges cross state lines, things like sharing driving records or all kinds of them. It's a normal way of states doing business. It's not a weird thing. States shouldn't be surprised by it. I looked up North Carolina's involved in 30, the oldest which goes back to 1791, establishing our boundary with Virginia. And you may wonder, well, could a state try to play games? Could they join the national popular vote and then, well, whoever's in charge of the legislature thinks that might not be to their advantage at this election cycle and get out? Theoretically, yes, but the people who wrote the bill were smart people, and there's a blackout period, if you will, between July 20th of an election year and the following inauguration. And that covers the time of the conventions, the campaign, and things. So a state legislature would have to be really good at reading the tea leaves and really nimble in doing something, which they're not often, to try and do that. And interstate compacts are enforced by the impairments clause of the US Constitution. And so if states are in there would be, very, very clear way to make them do what they said they were going to do. This is bipartisan. This is the advisory board of the National Popular Vote. I've coded them blue and red, and then one is a correspondent. It does lean a little heavier towards the liberal side, but there are some people. Michael Steele is a former chair of the Republican National Committee. It really is a bipartisan effort. Here are some of the endorsers of the National Popular Vote, and you'll recognize a lot of important groups that the League of Women Voters is one, and a lot of the groups that we often cooperate with are listed here. So it has pretty wide support. the history of the league in here. It goes quite a ways back. It goes back to 1970 when there was, that move to try and replace the Electoral College, and they supported the league, the direct election, and lobbied Congress. Then there was the fallow period, but in 97 they called for the abolition of the Electoral College. They worked on that some more in 2002, 2008 is when they first started talking about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And they voted in 2018 to add it to Making Democracy Work. They established a task force, and as probably some people got tired of hearing me talk about, in the last convention, a group of people got them to elevate direct election of the president, which includes both the abolition of the Electoral College and national popular vote, to the 5th category in Making Democracy Work. That's not yet reflected on their website or anything, but supposedly it's coming. And I realized kind of when I was doing this and thinking about this, we talk about abolition of the Electoral College, but when we get there, it'll actually be more complicated than that, because we have to figure out a way to not just abolish it, but have another way of officially tallying the votes to get the final popular vote for president. And it can't be what CNN reports. It's going to have to be a more official way than that. Just have a couple of things, and I've talked a little bit about this, is that how we do our elections has changed over time. And this is how states have changed electoral college votes, with only a few citizens doing it, a few states doing winner take all states going to it, and then 2 states going back to proportional voting. And 15 states in the district have agreed to go to the national popular vote when we can get to the required number of votes. As those of us in the league are very aware, who can vote for president has changed a lot over time, from only white men with property to, finally allowing women voting, other acts to get Native Americans and other types of citizens, the residents of the District of Columbia, and the most recent one during the Vietnam War, in which it was realized if you were old enough to be drafted, you should be allowed to vote. 2 Supreme Court decisions have said that 1 person, 1 vote should be the law of the land. All votes are equal. But as I showed earlier, they have done that for congressional and state legislature districts, but we really don't have that for the president. The league in Asheville did a video that goes into a lot more detail of this, and that's just my advertisement for the video that our voter services group worked on. The last couple of things I'm going to talk about are some of the myths or objections to national popular vote. One is that small states would be disadvantaged. Small states are disadvantaged because they're not swing states. That's really the only way small states are disadvantaged. They don't get campaign visits. Ohio, received many more campaign visits where all the small battleground states did not. So you're not competitive because you're not a battleground state. The myth that big cities will rule it, well, not really. About 20% of our population, and this is 2010 census data, they haven't released it for 2020 yet. About 20% of our population is in the 100 biggest cities, but the 100th biggest city is Spokane, Washington. So, that's not a really huge major metropolis. And about 20% are in rural America. So the majority are in small towns. Rural states tend not to be battleground states. They tend to be clearly in one side or the other. So again, they don't get the campaign visits. You're disadvantaged because you're not a battleground state is just the simple message over and over. Some of the more political science pundits who make arguments say, well, our current system encourages presidential candidates to build coalitions and to reach out to all states. But the data on campaign visits and the issues discussed just refute this. And they say, well, a national popular vote would make different states irrelevant. Well, which different states? Every vote in the country will count. You really can't ignore any vote. The current system provides, they'll say, a strong sense of state identity. Well, we're voting for the president of the entire country. you know, we're not voting as North Carolinians, we're voting for our country. And they'll say, well, a constitutional amendment is needed to change the way the president is elected. No, it's states. It's an exclusive plenary power of the states. We can do it maybe just as an intermediate step by states switching their way of awarding electors. This is a national popular vote, national site. It's one-stop shopping. There's just a wealth of information. You can spend days looking at all the things that are here. They also published this book called Every Vote Equal, which is the Bible or the reference manual, if you will, for the national popular vote. You can download it for free. It's a bargain at over 1,000 pages. You can buy a copy for $5.95 on Amazon. That price is set so that it's legal to give it to a state legislator. And that's not a book I don't think anybody's ever read cover to cover. There are two books that I'll just give as my personal recommendation that I really enjoyed. One is Let the People Pick the President. There's a longer subtitle by Jesse Wegman, who's with the New York Times, who goes into a lot of information about the Constitutional Convention and what happened in the 1970s. And a slightly more recent book, Our Unfinished March by Eric Holder, which talks about problems both with election of the president, with the election of, at the Congress level, and issues with the Supreme Court. And the Unfinished March is Selma. And both of those are, I wouldn't call it beach reading, but they're very approachable, and I'd recommend you look for them at your library. So again, the national popular vote is just voters. No flyover, no swing, no blue, no red, just voters. Call to action, again, you can learn more at their website, on social media. I publish very regularly for our league on our Facebook page. You can sign up to vote at the national level. You might want to have an action team at your chapter. Write and call your state legislators. When we have candidates again, ask them on their position. Write letters to the editor. Spread the word to friends and relatives. If people want to have a presentation, you know, we can help you get one for them. We really need to just make this part of the national conversation. After January 6th, there was some discussion of it. It appeared in some articles. It was more in the New York Times and the Atlantic maybe than the most popular press. So the important part is just to get the word out, because I'm ready to elect the president by popular vote. So I'll be happy to take questions. And I think if it's okay, I'll just stop the screen share. And go.
Okay. Okay, now let's see.
Let's see, I can look at the chat.
All right, we have a couple of questions here. The first one is from ODC's own Val Gist, who's asking, will changes in leadership in a specific state change its membership in the interstate compact?
No, because the interstate compact, it's a law, you know, they will pass, it's a law. It's called the National Popular Vote Bill or the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So it's a law of the state. So if there was a change in the leadership and the governor or all of that, yes, the state could pass a different law, you know, to, go back to winner take all, they could do that. But simply a change in leadership wouldn't do it. I mean, they would have to get it through, and they would have to get it through in the time frame that would affect the next election.
Okay, now we're going to see if you're a betting woman. This is from Ann Triolzi. If you were to give odds on it, what are the odds that a national compact will go through? Will it be soon?
I think it will go through. I think I know there are a couple of states that, based on the changes in the state legislature, are looking very likely to do it in this next year. I think there has been kind of a fallow period. I don't recall off the top of my head when the last state joined, but it was a while ago. I think if we get a couple of states going, that again will get it into the conversation and into national publicity, and I think we'll get it'll get rolling. I don't know if I don't know if it's belief or betting, but I think it'll happen in my voting lifetime. I sure hope so.
And then Another question from Anne, has anybody been vocally opposed to national popular vote, and what are their reasons?
Well, I talked about, I mean, some of those reasons I gave on the slide, that of the sort of the two policy wonks that have come up most often when they have debates or forums, their arguments are that the Electoral College encourages coalition building and encourages campaigning widely. Well, there's just isn't evidence for that. There are people who say, well, it's in the Constitution, we couldn't change it. Well, it's not changing it. It's still giving states the power to decide how they assign their electors, what they do with their electors. I don't know of too many politicians that have, prominent politicians that have come out against it. Again, it's not really an issue that comes up in general. So it is a state issue, so it's unlikely to be discussed on a national level, because it's a combination of state by state that has national implications. But there isn't like one or two prominent politicians that always come out against it. I think they just ignore it.
Okay, and then I think most people can see this, but I did notice that there are some people on the phone. So Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins has posted, you might be interested in reading the league's earlier position, who should elect the president, the case against the Electoral College National Civic Review 2001, volume 90, number 2. And then Anne has posted links to a couple of those votes. So I'm not sure, maybe we can send an email to all the attendees with those links so that they can get them an email.
I think since you're recording it, I think if they look at the recording, they'll see.
That's true. They'll, oh, I'm not
That's
sure.
been the case when it's possible. I know it's saved, when you save the recording, it saves the chat.
Oh, good. Okay. And then we just have a couple of, one says, I can't get the whole name here. Excellent, clear presentation. Oh, Lynn Kane. And then Hugh says, very interesting and knowledgeable presentation. I am digesting all of this. So that's the chat.
Oh, okay. I see there's one of someone who wants to have, and I'll put in my, I'll just send it to everyone. I'll just put in my email address. And for people on phone, it's just Suzanne 2001 at gmail.com. And if you want to talk, I would be happy to, or if I know someone closer to you, I'll be happy to do it.
Okay, and then we have another question from Hugh. What do you think about Ms. Warren wanting to abolish the Electoral College?
I'm not clicking on Ms. Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, Elizabeth Warren.
Yes.
Well, I mean, abolishing the Electoral College, I think, is a great ultimate goal, but it's going to be complicated. I mean, you can't just abolish it. You have to say what you're going to replace it with. And probably that's going to bring out all kinds of people who want to do other things, who want to maybe go to ranked choice voting for the president or something like that. So to me, my feeling, and I know other people who support the national popular vote feel that, for one thing, if we can get this passed and we have several elections and they see that a system where we just have a fairly straightforward way of recording the vote in every state to get the national vote, and that's the president, I think then it'll make it a lot easier for people to see that, yes, we can work out something to replace the Electoral College. But if you were to abolish the Electoral College today, how would we decide who's president? There still has to be, just like counties have to report to the state still have to report to somebody to get the national vote. total. And I think it's maybe been a gap on messaging, or that isn't brought up often enough. And I think a lot of people are going to want to weigh in when we get to that discussion and see it as an opportunity to do all kinds of different things.
Okay, is there anyone else with any questions? You want to unmute your microphone and ask your question?
I see one that says an email with the references should be a follow-up. I will send the slides to you after this. And I actually have a bunch of slides after the one I stopped at that has a lot more details about different things, and I can just send that to you. I guess I would rather you not share it too widely outside the league. I feel people in the league have a knowledge and a perspective to understand things, and just let out on the general public may not be. I just worry of misinterpretation.
Why don't you send the slides to me and
Okay.
Anne?
Yeah.
And then I will compile the links and other resources, and
Okay.
we'll get that out to everybody. And
Okay.
and then your video will be available on our website.
Okay.
In the not too distant future, like I would say within a week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. My dog's barking his thanks, but thank you so much. It's very interesting. And one question, do you think there is any value in all local leagues kind of getting together to try to put pressure on the powers that be in North Carolina to make anything happen? Or is that just?
Oh, I think so. I think if a lot of state legislators start getting emails and other letters saying that we think they should bring this up in North Carolina, I am going to propose, and people who are, I know Jennifer knows, I am going to propose at our North Carolina convention in May that we add a section on direct election of the president to our representative government section of our public policies. I'm kind of waiting. I haven't made it quite as a formal presentation because I'm waiting to see exactly what language the league puts into the 2022-2024 impact on issues, because I think it would just make the most sense to mirror that language. But well, I'm old enough. Some of the other people, as Arlo Guthrie said, if one person does it, they'll think, and if two people, and if every chapter does it, they'll think it's a movement. And that's what we need, is a movement. Alice's Restaurant.
Yeah. I'm that old.
Is anyone working on alternatives to the EC? Yes, Sarah. Well, there are various people, and including in the league, working on abolishing the Electoral College. There are people, I guess it's not so much directly against the EC, but again, people who are working on ranked choice voting and what is it, preference voting, where you say yes to all the people you're willing to tolerate or whatever. I must say I'm not as much of an expert on some of those other things. I probably should be, but my head is full of national popular vote info.
There's the question about, do you recommend forming action teams in league chapters?
Yeah.
Which is kind of what I was asking too, but I don't know that there's anything involved that would be a requirement to do that, other than to just survey your membership's interest and see if there's interest in pulling a team together. And then if there are teams that are working throughout the state, linking up and sharing information is always, I think, useful.
I mean, our team has worked a lot on trying to identify places where we can give talks locally. And it helps because people know different things, and somebody knows Rotary and somebody knows this church group. One of the things we're going to be starting this year is trying to reach out more to the colleges and universities in our area. Though I have given a talk to students in a political club or something at UNC Asheville, but we have a number of smaller, well, Warren Wilson is not that small, but we're going to try and get more students involved and things like that. It's been mainly me. I've talked to Rotaries, I've talked to people at churches, the Friends group, the DAR, and it's good. And it often, if you talk somewhere, then like today, somebody says, "Oh, could you talk to us?" And you kind of have to get out there and hope slowly you'll get a bit of a snowball effect. And
one more comment from Lynn Kane. I appreciate your point that abolish the Electoral College requires an alternative. And then Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins says, thank you, excellent presentation and thoughtful questions.
I certainly agree with the questions.
Mm.
And you're muted.
No wonder no one's listening to me. I would like to thank Suzanne for taking the time and sharing her knowledge with us tonight. And I thank everybody for attending, and Sally for moderating the questions for us, and our team that put together the advertising and announcements and communications about the event tonight. It was well attended, and want to thank everybody.
As do I.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much. I really appreciate all of this. And after a week in which you've probably done a lot of thinking about things, politics, to add another hours.
Right. Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Come
Bye.
to Asheville.